I woke up at 6 in the morning to the grinding sound of a snowplow pushing a mountain of heavy, wet snow directly across my driveway. And I knew immediately that my day was about to go sideways in the worst possible way. My name is James Fitzgerald, and I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in Maple Ridge, a suburban neighborhood just outside Denver, Colorado. I had moved here 3 years ago after my divorce, thinking that a quiet community with tree-lined streets and well-maintained properties would be the perfect place to start fresh. What I didn't account for was the Home Owner Association and its president, a woman named Patricia Whitmore, who had made it her personal mission to turn our neighborhood into her own private kingdom. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 52 years old with a blonde bob haircut that she kept perfectly styled, always wore velour tracksuits in various shades of pink and purple, and drove a white Escalade with a HOA president bumper sticker that she'd custom ordered online. She had been the president of the Maple Ridge HOA for 7 years, running unopposed because anyone who dared to challenge her quickly found themselves buried in violation notices for the most ridiculous infractions imaginable. I stumbled out of bed and looked out my bedroom window, my breath fogging up the glass in the cold morning air. The snowplow had indeed created a massive barrier of compacted snow right at the end of my driveway, but that wasn't even the worst part. Patricia's Escalade was parked perpendicular to my driveway entrance, blocking any possible exit even if I managed to clear the snow. She was standing next to her vehicle in a puffy pink coat, talking on her phone and gesturing wildly with one hand. I threw on jeans, a heavy sweater, my winter boots, and my thick jacket before heading downstairs. My coffee maker was already programmed to brew, and I grabbed the largest mug I owned, filling it to the brim with black coffee. I was going to need the caffeine for whatever confrontation was about to happen. When I opened my front door, the cold January air hit me like a slap. It had snowed nearly 8 inches overnight, and the morning sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the pristine white landscape. I trudged through the snow on my front walkway, making my way toward the street where Patricia was still on her phone. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice level. "Patricia, your car is blocking my driveway." She held up one finger without even looking at me, continuing her phone conversation. I could hear her high-pitched voice going on about some emergency HOA meeting that needed to happen later that day. I waited, sipping my coffee and feeling the cold seeping through my boots. After what felt like 5 minutes but was probably only 2, she finally ended her call and turned to face me with a plastic smile. "Good morning, James," she said in that syrupy sweet voice she used when she was about to drop some bad news. "I'm sure you're wondering about the parking situation." "Your car is blocking my driveway," I repeated. "I need to get to work." "Well, that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," Patricia said, pulling out her phone and tapping at the screen. "You see, according to the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, all residents are required to maintain their driveways in a clear and accessible condition at all times. Your driveway currently has snow on it, which is a violation." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "It snowed last night. I literally just woke up. I was about to clear it." "Nevertheless, it's a violation," she said, still maintaining that smile. "And until you pay the fine and clear the snow to HOA standards, I've taken the liberty of blocking your driveway to prevent you from using it in its current unsafe condition." "That's insane," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "You can't just block my driveway. That's illegal." "Actually, as HOA president, I have the authority to take necessary measures to enforce our community standards, Patricia said, crossing her arms. You'll find it's all in the bylaws you signed when you purchased your home. I had read those bylaws, or at least I thought I had. They were 73 pages of dense legal jargon that my real estate agent had assured me were standard HOA stuff. I was beginning to realize that had been a mistake. Fine, I said. What's the fine? $250 for the first violation, Patricia said cheerfully. And you'll need to submit photographic evidence of the cleared driveway to the HOA committee for approval before I can move my vehicle. This is ridiculous, I said. I need to get to work. I can't just wait around for your committee to approve photos. You should have thought of that before you violated the bylaws, Patricia said, turning back toward her Escalade. I suggest you get started on that driveway. The sooner you clear it and pay the fine, the sooner you can go about your day. She climbed into her vehicle but didn't start it or move it. Instead, she just sat there, scrolling through her phone like she had all the time in the world. Meanwhile, I was trapped in my own home because this power-hungry HOA tyrant had decided to make an example out of me. I pulled out my phone and called my boss, explaining the situation. Fortunately, Mark was understanding. "Take your time," he said. "Just work from home today if you need to. This sounds like a nightmare." With that immediate crisis averted, I went back inside to grab my snow shovel. If Patricia wanted to play games, I'd clear the driveway, but I wasn't paying any ridiculous fine. As I walked back outside with my shovel, I noticed several of my neighbors peeking out their windows. No one came out to help or even to express solidarity. That was the effect Patricia had on people. Everyone was too scared of becoming her next target. I started clearing the snow from my driveway, working up a sweat despite the cold temperature. The snow was heavy and wet, the worst kind for shoveling. Each load felt like it weighed 20 pounds. As I worked, Patricia remained in her Escalade, occasionally glancing up from her phone to watch my progress. After about 40 minutes, I had cleared most of the driveway. My back was aching, and my hands were starting to go numb despite my gloves. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the cleared driveway, then walked over to Patricia's window. She rolled it down just a crack. "Yes, I've cleared the driveway," I said. "Here are the photos, now move your car." "I'll need to forward these to the committee for review," she said. "It should only take a few hours." A few hours. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Patricia, this is insane. You need to move your car right now." "I'm sorry, but procedure is procedure," she said, "and you still haven't paid the fine." "I'm not paying a fine for snow that fell overnight while I was asleep," I said firmly. "Then I'm afraid my vehicle will have to stay exactly where it is," Patricia said, rolling her window back up. That's when something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, I'd show her what happens when you illegally block someone's property. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. "Denver Police Department, non-emergency line. How can I help you?" "Hi, I need to report a vehicle blocking my driveway," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "The owner is refusing to move it." "What's your address, sir?" I gave her my address on Willow Creek Drive in Maple Ridge. She told me an officer would be out within the hour to assess the situation. I thanked her and hung up, then looked back at Patricia, who was now staring at me through her windshield with narrowed eyes. "You just called the police?" she asked, rolling her window down again. "Your car is illegally blocking my driveway," I said. "You've been warned multiple times to move it and you've refused. So yes, I called the police." "I'm the HOA president," Patricia sputtered, her face turning red. "You can't just call the police on me for enforcing community standards." "Watch me," I said, turning and walking back toward my house. I went inside and made myself another cup of coffee, watching from my living room window as Patricia made several agitated phone calls. I could see her gesturing wildly, her face getting redder with each conversation. Part of me felt a small sense of satisfaction. For years, I'd watched her bully neighbors, hand out ridiculous fines, and generally make everyone's lives miserable. Maybe today would be the day someone finally stood up to her. True to the dispatcher's word, a patrol car pulled up about 45 minutes later. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, a no-nonsense-looking woman in her mid-30s with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She surveyed the situation, looking at Patricia's Escalade blocking my driveway, then walked over to talk to Patricia first. I grabbed my coat and headed back outside. As I approached, I could hear Patricia explaining in her most reasonable-sounding voice that she was simply enforcing HOA regulations, and that I was a difficult resident who refused to follow the rules. "Madam," Officer Rodriguez said patiently, "regardless of HOA regulations, you cannot block someone's driveway. That's against city ordinance." "But he was in violation of our community standards," Patricia protested. "That's a civil matter between you and the HOA," Officer Rodriguez said. "But blocking his driveway is a violation of city law. I'm going to need you to move your vehicle now." "I absolutely will not," Patricia said, crossing her arms. "This is HOA property." "The driveway belongs to the homeowner," Officer Rodriguez said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "This is your final warning. Move your vehicle or I'll have it towed and you'll receive a citation." "You can't do that." Patricia's voice was getting shrill now. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the president of the Maple Ridge HOA. I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. One phone call and you'll be directing traffic in the worst part of town." Officer Rodriguez's expression didn't change. "Madam, threatening a police officer is not advisable. I'm going to ask you one more time to move your vehicle." "I'm not threatening anyone," Patricia backpedaled slightly. "I'm simply making you aware of my connections in this community." Officer Rodriguez pulled out her radio and called for a tow truck. Patricia's eyes went wide. "You can't be serious," she said. "You were given multiple opportunities to move your vehicle voluntarily," Officer Rodriguez said. "You chose not to comply. The tow truck will be here shortly." Patricia's face went from red to purple. "This is outrageous. I'll be filing a formal complaint. James, you'll be receiving a bill for every single expense this causes me, plus additional fines for harassment." "You're the one who parked here," I pointed out. "I just wanted to go to work." The tow truck arrived 15 minutes later. By this time, several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. I saw Karen Chen from 2 doors down, Marcus Williams from across the street, and elderly Mrs. Henderson from the corner house, all standing on their porches or in their driveways, watching the scene unfold. The tow truck driver, a burly guy named Steve according to his name patch, got out and surveyed the situation. Officer Rodriguez explained what needed to happen, and Steve nodded, getting to work hooking up Patricia's Escalade. "You can't do this." Patricia shrieked, actually stamping her foot in the snow. "That vehicle is worth $70,000. Then you probably should have moved it when the officer asked," Steve said matter-of-factly, continuing his work. Officer Rodriguez was writing up a citation. "Madam, you're being cited for illegally blocking a private driveway which carries a fine of $350. You'll also be responsible for the towing and impound fees." $350. Patricia looked like she might faint. "This is highway robbery." "You can contest the ticket in court if you feel it was issued in error," Officer Rodriguez said, handing her the citation. The information is on the back. As Steve finished hooking up the Escalade, Patricia turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "You're going to regret this, James." "I'll make sure you regret this." "Are you threatening him?" Officer Rodriguez asked sharply. "I'm simply stating a fact," Patricia said. "The HOA has many tools at its disposal to deal with problematic residents." Officer Rodriguez looked at me. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I'd recommend documenting any further interactions with the HOA. If you feel harassed or threatened, don't hesitate to file a report." I nodded, thanking her. The tow truck began pulling away with Patricia's Escalade attached, and Patricia stood in the street looking absolutely defeated. Officer Rodriguez got back in her patrol car and drove off, leaving Patricia and me alone with the handful of neighbors who were still watching. Patricia pulled out her phone and called what I assumed was an Uber or taxi. She stood there in the cold, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, her entire body radiating fury. Marcus Williams walked over to me, a slight smile on his face. "Man, I never thought I'd see the day someone actually stood up to her." "I just wanted to go to work," I said. "She's the one who escalated it. She gave me a $500 fine last month because my garbage can lid was the wrong color," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Said it wasn't regulation green. I had to special order a new lid from some company she specified. Cost me $75 plus the fine." Mrs. Henderson came shuffling over, bundled up in a thick wool coat. "She fined me $300 because my holiday wreath was still up on January 3rd. Said it violated the community aesthetic guidelines." Soon, other neighbors started sharing their own Patricia horror stories. It turned out pretty much everyone in the neighborhood had been on the receiving end of her petty tyranny at some point. A ride-share car pulled up, and Patricia climbed in without a word, still clutching her phone and her citation. As she drove away, Karen Chen said what we were all thinking. "She's going to retaliate hard. You know that, right?" "I figured," I said. "But I'm done being pushed around. If she wants to fight this, we'll fight it." "We?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, we," I said. "Look, she's been terrorizing this whole neighborhood for years. Maybe it's time we all stood together." The group exchanged glances. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, weighing the risk of opposing Patricia against the potential reward of finally being free from her constant harassment. "I'm in," Marcus said first. "Me too," Karen added. One by one, the others agreed. Even Mrs. Henderson, who was 83 and usually avoided conflict at all costs, nodded her support. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet at my house that evening to discuss strategy. As everyone dispersed back to their homes, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. I just declared war on the HOA president, but at least I wouldn't be fighting alone. I went inside and finally started my workday, logging into my laptop and checking emails. It was hard to focus with everything that had happened, but I managed to get through my immediate tasks. Around 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Hello, Mr. Fitzgerald. This is Sandra from the Maple Ridge HOA office. I'm calling to inform you that an emergency meeting of the HOA board has been scheduled for 6 o'clock this evening at the community center. Your presence is requested." "Requested or required?" I asked. "Requested," Sandra said, though her tone suggested it wasn't really optional. "Mrs. Whitmore has filed a formal complaint against you for harassment and creating a public disturbance. The board will be hearing her complaint and determining appropriate action." "That's rich coming from someone who illegally blocked my driveway," I said. "I'm just relaying the message, Mr. Fitzgerald," Sandra said, her voice neutral. "Will you be attending?" "I'll be there," I said, "and I'll be bringing documentation of everything that happened this morning." That's certainly your right, Sandra said. The meeting begins promptly at 6. Please don't be late. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately started documenting everything that had happened. I wrote out a detailed timeline, downloaded the photos I'd taken of my cleared driveway, and even checked if any of my neighbors had doorbell cameras that might have captured the morning's events. Karen Chen confirmed that her Ring camera had a clear view of the street and promised to send me the footage. At 6 o'clock that evening, my living room was filled with neighbors. Marcus, Karen, Mrs. Henderson, and 5 others had shown up, all of them sharing their grievances about Patricia and the HOA. We had everything from excessive fines for minor violations to bizarre requirements that seemed designed solely to generate revenue for the HOA. She fined me $200 because my lawn was 1 inch taller than the regulation height, said Greg Patterson, a software engineer who lived 4 houses down. 1 inch. I measured it myself afterward, and she was right, but who enforces rules like that? She made me remove my daughter's tire swing because it wasn't an approved recreational structure, added Sandra Dawson, a single mother of 2. My daughter cried for days. As we compared notes, a pattern emerged. Patricia had been systematically targeting residents with fines and violations, but the money wasn't going where it should. The HOA was supposed to use funds for community maintenance, neighborhood events, and shared amenities. But our community center was falling apart, the playground equipment was outdated and rusty, and the last neighborhood event had been 3 years ago. Where is all the money going? Karen asked the question we were all thinking. That's what we need to find out, I said. The HOA is required to maintain financial records and make them available to homeowners upon request. We should submit a formal request to review the books. Patricia will never allow that, Marcus said. She doesn't have a choice, I replied. It's in the Colorado HOA laws. If she refuses, we can take legal action. We spent the next hour drafting a formal request for financial records and a petition to call for a special election to review Patricia's position as president. By the time everyone left, it was nearly 8 o'clock, and I realized I'd completely missed the HOA board meeting. My phone had 3 missed calls from the HOA office and 2 voicemails. The first was Sandra informing me that my absence had been noted. The second was Patricia herself, her voice dripping with false sweetness. James, it's such a shame you couldn't make it to the meeting tonight. The board has decided to move forward with disciplinary action in your absence. You'll be receiving formal notification of your fines and penalties within 48 hours. I do hope you'll take our community standards more seriously in the future. Have a blessed evening. I deleted the voicemail and started drafting an email to Sandra, explaining that I had never received proper notice of the meeting and requesting the minutes and any decisions made. I also attached our formal request for financial records. The next morning, I woke up to find a thick envelope taped to my front door. Inside were 5 separate violation notices, each with its own fine. According to Patricia's documentation, my house number was mounted half an inch too low on my mailbox. $200 fine. My front door wreath was not an approved style. $150 fine. My snow removal from yesterday had not been completed to HOA standards because there was still some ice on the edges. $300 fine. My garbage cans had been visible from the street for more than the allowed 12 hours. $100 fine. And finally, my doormat was not an approved color. $75 fine. The total came to $825, all for violations that were either completely arbitrary or physically impossible for me to have known about. I took photos of everything and immediately called a lawyer. I found Thomas Morrison, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, and his secretary scheduled me for a consultation that afternoon. Thomas Morrison's office was in downtown Denver, a sleek modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a man in his early 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I laid out the entire situation, showing him all the documentation I'd gathered. He listened carefully, occasionally taking notes, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a slight smile. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you've stumbled into something potentially very serious," he said. "These fines are clearly retaliatory, which is illegal under Colorado law. But more importantly, if your suspicions about the HOA finances are correct, we could be looking at embezzlement or fraud." "So what do we do?" I asked. "First, I'm going to send a letter to the HOA on your behalf, disputing all of these fines and putting them on notice that any further retaliatory action will result in legal consequences," Thomas said. "Second, we're going to push hard on that financial records request. If they don't comply within the statutory time frame, we'll file a motion to compel. Third, I'd recommend gathering as many of your neighbors as possible. The more people who are willing to testify about Patricia's pattern of behavior, the stronger our case becomes." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, knowing lawyers didn't come cheap. "I'll be honest with you, HOA cases can get expensive," Thomas said. "But if we can prove fraud or embezzlement, there's a good chance the HOA's insurance will cover damages, and you might even recoup your legal fees. Let me do some preliminary work. I'll charge you a flat fee of $1,500 for the initial investigation and correspondence. If it goes beyond that, we'll discuss options." It was a lot of money, but I didn't see another choice. I agreed, and Thomas said he'd have a letter sent out by the end of the day. Over the next week, things escalated rapidly. Patricia responded to Thomas's letter with her own attorney, a corporate lawyer named Richard Stephenson, who sent a lengthy response insisting that all fines were legitimate and that I was a vexatious litigant trying to undermine the HOA's authority. Meanwhile, our group of neighbors continued to grow. We started a private Facebook group called Maple Ridge HOA Reform, and within 3 days had over 40 members, nearly half the neighborhood. People shared stories, photos of ridiculous violation notices, and calculations of how much money the HOA had collected in fines over the past few years. Karen Chen, who was an accountant, created a spreadsheet. Based on the fines people reported paying, the HOA had collected over $90,000 in the past 2 years alone. That didn't include regular HOA dues, which were $200 per household per month. "There's no way they've spent this money on the community," Karen said during one of our evening meetings. "Even if you account for landscaping, utilities for the community center, and general maintenance, the numbers don't add up." The HOA had 20 days to respond to our formal request for financial records. On day 19, Sandra from the HOA office called to inform me that the records were available for review, but they could only be inspected in person at the community center during business hours, which were conveniently Monday through Wednesday from 10 in the morning until noon, when most people were at work. I took a day off and went to review the records. Sandra led me to a small, windowless room and presented me with 3 massive banker's boxes filled with unsorted receipts, bank statements, and random documents. "These are the financial records?" I asked, staring at the disorganized mess. "These are all the documents we have," Sandra said with a shrug that suggested she knew exactly how unhelpful this was. I spent 4 hours sorting through the boxes, taking photos of everything with my phone. The disorganization seemed intentional. Bank statements were mixed with grocery receipts, maintenance invoices were bundled with personal shopping bills, and nothing was in any chronological order. But even in that chaos, some patterns emerged. There were regular transfers from the HOA's main account to a secondary account, labeled only as special projects. There were receipts for luxury items that had nothing to do with neighborhood maintenance, including several high-end restaurant meals, spa treatments, and what appeared to be furniture purchases from expensive boutiques. Most damning was a receipt I found buried in the middle of the second box. It was for a custom-made white Escalade with all the premium options, purchased 18 months ago for $72,000. The buyer listed on the receipt was the Maple Ridge HOA, but we didn't have any community vehicles. I photographed everything and sent it all to Thomas Morrison. He called me within an hour. "James, I think we need to bring in the authorities," he said, his voice serious. "This looks like embezzlement. Patricia has been using HOA funds for personal expenses." "Are you sure?" I asked, even though the evidence seemed pretty clear. "We'll need a forensic accountant to go through everything properly, but yes, I'm quite sure," Thomas said. "I'm going to contact the Colorado Division of Real Estate. They oversee HOA regulations. I'm also going to recommend you file a police report." The next day, Thomas and I met with Detective Sarah Martinez at the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s who listened to our presentation with increasing interest. "How many homeowners are in your HOA?" she asked. 86, I said. "And you're saying the president has been systematically fining residents for minor violations and then using the money for personal expenses?" "That's what the evidence suggests," Thomas said, handing her a folder with copies of the most damning documents. Detective Martinez flipped through the folder, her expression darkening. "I'll need to get a warrant to seize the complete financial records. This is going to take some time, but if what you're showing me is accurate, Mrs. Whitmore is in serious trouble." She took our statements and said she'd be in touch. Thomas and I left the police station feeling like we'd taken a significant step, but also knowing that Patricia was going to fight back hard once she found out. We didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting. The notice went out via email, stating that there were serious allegations being made against the board and that all homeowners should attend to hear the truth. The community center was packed that evening. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls. Patricia stood at the front of the room behind a podium, flanked by the other 2 board members, Ron Kemper and Lisa Hughes, both of whom looked distinctly uncomfortable. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared speech. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice projecting across the room. "I'm sure many of you have heard rumors circulating about alleged financial improprieties within our HOA. I want to address these false accusations head-on." She went on for nearly 10 minutes, painting herself as a dedicated public servant who had sacrificed countless hours to maintain our community standards. She described me as a disgruntled resident with a personal vendetta, someone who was trying to undermine the HOA because I didn't want to follow the rules. "These allegations are nothing more than a smear campaign," Patricia said, her voice rising with indignation. "And I will not stand for it. I have served this community faithfully for 7 years, and this is the thanks I get." When she finally paused for breath, I stood up. "Patricia, can you explain why the HOA purchased a $72,000 Escalade that you personally drive?" The room went completely silent. Patricia's face paled, then flushed red. "That vehicle is HOA property," she said quickly. "It's used for official HOA business." "Really?" Karen Chen stood up. "Because I've seen you use it for grocery shopping, going to the gym, and taking your kids to school." "That doesn't sound like HOA business to me." Other neighbors started calling out questions. Why were there receipts for spa treatments in the HOA records? What were the special project funds being used for? Why had the community center not been properly maintained despite all the money coming in? Patricia tried to maintain control, but the room was in chaos. Ron Kemper, one of the other board members, stood up and held up his hands for quiet. "I think we need to address these concerns properly," he said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Patricia, maybe we should table this meeting until we can provide full financial transparency." "I will not be bullied," Patricia snapped at him. "These people are out of line." "These people pay your salary through their HOA dues," Marcus Williams shouted from the back. "You work for us, not the other way around." The meeting deteriorated from there. Patricia tried to adjourn early, but the residents refused to leave. Finally, Lisa Hughes, the third board member, announced that she was resigning from the board effective immediately. "I didn't sign up for this," she said, grabbing her coat. "Patricia, you told me the finances were all proper. If they're not, I want no part of it." Ron Kemper looked torn, but after a moment he also announced his resignation. That left Patricia standing alone at the podium, facing a room full of angry homeowners. "Fine," she said, her voice shaking with rage or maybe fear. "If that's how you all feel, I'll have the HOA's attorney send over complete financial statements. You'll see that everything has been completely legitimate." She stormed out of the community center, leaving everyone talking at once. Over the next few days, the neighborhood was buzzing with activity. The story had gotten out to the local news, and a reporter from Denver's Channel 7 showed up to interview residents. Karen, Marcus, and I spoke on camera about the situation, carefully sticking to facts we could prove. Patricia went on the defensive, posting long rants on the neighborhood Facebook page about how she was being persecuted and claiming that any financial irregularities were simply accounting errors. But her support was crumbling. Even residents who had previously been afraid to speak out were now coming forward with their own stories. Detective Martinez called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "We executed a warrant this morning and seized all the HOA financial records, along with Mrs. Whitmore's personal financial records. Our forensic accountant is going through everything now. I wanted to give you a heads up that this is moving forward." "Thank you," I said. "Any idea how long it will take?" "These things usually take a few months, but given the apparent scope of the fraud, we're prioritizing it. I'd guess we'll have answers within 6 to 8 weeks." It actually took 4 weeks. Detective Martinez called to inform me that Patricia Whitmore had been arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The forensic analysis had revealed that she'd stolen over $130,000 from the HOA over a 5-year period, using the money for personal expenses, luxury purchases, and even a family vacation to Hawaii that she'd somehow categorized as an HOA conference expense. The arrest happened early on a Thursday morning. I learned about it from Marcus, who texted me a link to the local news website. The headline read, "Local HOA president arrested for embezzling over $130,000 from neighborhood funds." The article included Patricia's mugshot. She looked smaller somehow, her signature blonde bob disheveled, her face bare of makeup and showing every one of her 52 years. There was no trace of the imperious HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood. She just looked like what she was, a criminal who got caught. The story exploded across local media. It turned out that Patricia had been running similar schemes in 2 previous neighborhoods before moving to Maple Ridge. She'd left her previous HOA positions just before audits could reveal her theft, moving on to a new community where no one knew her history. The legal process moved forward. Patricia was released on bail but placed under house arrest. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office was pushing for serious prison time given the premeditated nature of the crimes and the multiple victims. Meanwhile, our neighborhood had to figure out how to move forward. We called a special election to form a new HOA board. The turnout was unprecedented, with over 90% of homeowners voting. Marcus Williams was elected president, Karen Chen became treasurer, and Mrs. Henderson, despite her age, agreed to serve as secretary because, as she put it, someone needed to make sure we did things right this time. The new board's first action was to hire an independent management company to handle day-to-day HOA operations and maintain proper financial oversight. The second action was to refund every fine that Patricia had issued in the past 3 years, using what was left in the HOA's accounts. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was something. The third action was to completely revise our HOA bylaws, removing the ridiculous requirements Patricia had added over the years. No more regulations about doormat colors or wreath styles. No more fines for grass being an inch too tall. We kept reasonable rules about property maintenance and noise, but everything else got scrapped. Thomas Morrison helped us file a claim against the HOA's insurance policy to recover the embezzled funds. It was a long process, but eventually, the insurance company paid out a settlement that covered most of what Patricia had stolen. Patricia's criminal trial took place 7 months after her arrest. I attended every day, along with a rotating group of neighbors. The prosecution laid out a damning case, showing how Patricia had systematically looted the HOA's accounts while maintaining a facade of strict rule enforcement to distract from her theft. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she had mental health issues and hadn't understood that what she was doing was wrong, but the prosecution countered with evidence of elaborate cover-ups and false accounting records that showed clear intent. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts: 15 counts of embezzlement, 12 counts of fraud, and 8 counts of theft. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of $130,000 plus interest. Patricia's husband divorced her shortly after the sentencing. Her kids, who were in their 20s, publicly disowned her on social media. The Escalade that had started this whole mess was seized and sold at auction, with the proceeds going toward her restitution payments. As for me, life slowly returned to normal. My driveway was never blocked again, obviously. The ridiculous fines were refunded, and I even got a formal apology from the new HOA board for everything I'd gone through, though I'd been the one pushing for reforms, so it felt a bit unnecessary. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out. We started having actual community events again, block parties and holiday gatherings that people actually wanted to attend. The community center got a much-needed renovation. The playground equipment was replaced with new structures that kids actually enjoyed. And we even added a dog park that had been requested for years, but always rejected by Patricia. I ran into Sandra, the former HOA office manager, at the grocery store about a year after everything went down. She apologized profusely, saying she'd suspected something was wrong but had been too afraid to speak up. I told her I understood. Patricia had been good at intimidating people. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons. First, always read your HOA bylaws carefully and make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. Second, don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they have official titles and authority. And third, when people show you who they really are, believe them. Looking back on that morning when I woke up to find my driveway blocked, I never could have imagined where it would lead. A simple act of calling the police to have an illegally parked car towed had unraveled years of fraud and freed an entire neighborhood from a petty tyrant's control. Marcus often joked that I should get a medal or at least a plaque thanking me for my service to the community. I didn't need recognition. Seeing kids playing on the new playground equipment, watching neighbors chat freely without looking over their shoulders, and knowing that no one was going to get slapped with a ridiculous fine for having the wrong colored doormat was reward enough. Patricia served 4 years of her 6-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved to a different state and took a job working retail. She was barred from ever serving on an HOA board again as part of her sentence, which seemed like a fitting end to her reign of terror. The white Escalade that had blocked my driveway that snowy January morning, the vehicle that had been purchased with stolen HOA funds and had become the symbol of Patricia's corruption, was bought at auction by a local businessman who turned it into a company vehicle for his landscaping business. I saw it around town occasionally, now painted green with the company logo on the side, and it always made me smile. Our neighborhood became something of a cautionary tale in HOA circles. The local news did a follow-up story a year after Patricia's sentencing, talking about how one resident standing up to abuse had exposed major corruption. Other neighborhoods started requesting audits of their own HOA finances, and several other cases of embezzlement were discovered across the state. Colorado even passed new legislation strengthening HOA oversight and requiring more transparent financial reporting. The law was informally nicknamed Patricia's Law, though that wasn't its official name. It mandated annual independent audits for HOAs over a certain size and gave homeowners stronger rights to access financial records. My legal fees ended up being covered by the insurance settlement. Plus, I received a small payment as compensation for the harassment I'd endured. I used that money to install a really nice security camera system around my house, just in case. Better safe than sorry. The property values in Maple Ridge actually went up after Patricia left, and the neighborhood's reputation improved. Potential buyers who had previously avoided the area because of the notorious HOA were now interested. Several houses sold quickly, and the new residents were welcomed warmly by everyone. I stayed in touch with many of the neighbors who had banded together during those chaotic months. Marcus and his wife became good friends, and we'd have barbecues in the summer. Karen helped me with my taxes one year and refused to let me pay her. Mrs. Henderson baked cookies for the whole neighborhood every Christmas and always made sure I got a double batch. The community center, once a neglected building that Patricia had basically ignored except to hold her kangaroo court meetings, became a real hub of activity. We hosted movie nights, yoga classes, and even a monthly book club that I attended occasionally. The building that had represented everything wrong with our HOA became a symbol of what was right about coming together as a community. I thought about writing a book about the experience, but ultimately decided against it. The story had been told in the news, in the court documents, and in the conversations between neighbors. Adding another telling seemed redundant. Besides, I preferred to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. There were occasional reminders of the old days. Every now and then, someone would find an old violation notice from Patricia tucked in a drawer or filing cabinet, and it would become a joke. "Oh no, my doormat is beige instead of brown. Better fine myself $200. The absurdity of it all was easier to laugh about once the threat was gone. The snow plow incident itself became legendary in our neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and shake their heads in disbelief. A woman had blocked someone's driveway with her own vehicle, gotten it towed, and that had led to uncovering over $100,000 in embezzlement. Truth really was stranger than fiction. I kept the citation Officer Rodriguez had given Patricia that morning, framed on my wall. It was a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing, even something as simple as making a phone call, can have consequences far beyond what you'd ever imagine. That $350 ticket had cost Patricia her freedom, her reputation, and her family. Some people might say I ruined her life. I didn't see it that way. Patricia had made her choices, and she'd been making those choices for years before I ever got involved. She'd stolen from hardworking people, abused her authority, and created a climate of fear in what should have been a peaceful neighborhood. All I did was refuse to be another victim and had the courage to push back when she tried to bully me. The morning everything happened, when I'd stood in my driveway with my coffee watching Patricia refuse to move her Escalade, I'd been tired, frustrated, and just wanted to get to work. I never set out to be a whistleblower or a neighborhood hero. I just wanted my driveway clear so I could go about my day. Sometimes that's all it takes, though. One person deciding they've had enough and taking action. Life in Maple Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. The seasons changed, snow fell and melted, grass grew and was mowed, and through it all, our little neighborhood thrived. We had our occasional disagreements and issues like any community, but we handled them with respect and common sense. The new HOA board actually worked for the residents instead of ruling over them, and what a difference that made. I still drove past the spot where Patricia's Escalade had been that morning, the place where everything changed. In the summer, it was just another stretch of curb where neighbors parked when they had visitors. In the winter, it was where the snow plow left its usual pile of snow, which everyone cleared without complaint, because that's what neighbors do. Years later, when I eventually sold my house to move closer to my daughter's family in Fort Collins, the real estate agent mentioned that Maple Ridge had become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the area. "Great community feel," she said. "Really involved HOA that actually cares about the residents." I smiled at that. Yeah, we'd learned our lessons the hard way, but we'd learned them well. The new owners of my house were a young couple with a baby on the way. They'd heard about the neighborhood's history and were impressed by how the community had come together. "It's good to know people here stand up for what's right," the husband said during the final walk-through. I gave them my number and told them to call if they ever needed anything or had questions about the neighborhood. I also told them the whole story about Patricia, the blocked driveway, and everything that followed. They listened with wide eyes, hardly believing it had all started with something so simple. "So the HOA president really blocked your driveway over snow?" the wife asked. "She really did," I confirmed. "And she got towed and arrested before she finished her breakfast that morning." Well, the arrest came later, but the towing definitely happened before breakfast. They laughed, and I could see them already falling in love with the place, not despite its history, but because of how the community had responded to adversity. As I drove away from Maple Ridge for the last time, I looked in my rearview mirror at the neighborhood that had been such a huge part of my life. The tree-lined streets looked peaceful in the afternoon sun. Kids were playing in front yards. Neighbors were chatting over fences, and somewhere in there, the HOA was probably having a meeting about normal things like organizing the summer block party or coordinating the neighborhood garage sale. It was a far cry from the days of Patricia Whitmore's tyrannical rule, when people were afraid to put up Christmas decorations for fear of violating some obscure regulation. We'd come a long way, and it had all started because I refused to accept that blocking my driveway was somehow justified. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been like if I just accepted Patricia's demands that morning. If I'd paid the fine, cleared the snow to her specifications, and waited patiently for her to move her vehicle on her own schedule. I probably would have avoided a lot of stress and conflict in the short term. But then, Patricia would still be president, still stealing from the HOA, still terrorizing residents with her petty power trips. The embezzlement would have continued, maybe for years more. More money would have been stolen, more people would have been bullied, and the neighborhood would have continued to suffer under her control. One moment of standing up for myself had changed everything, not just for me but for 86 families. That was worth all the headaches and stress that had come with it. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered how she was doing in her new life. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She'd made her choices, and now she lived with the consequences. That's how the world works, or at least how it should work. The lesson I took from the whole experience was simple. Don't let bullies win. Whether they're playground tyrants, office jerks, or HOA presidents drunk on a tiny amount of power, standing up to them is always the right choice. It might not be easy, and there might be consequences, but the alternative, living under someone's thumb, accepting mistreatment as normal, is always worse. My new life in Fort Collins was good. I was closer to my daughter and got to see my grandson every week. But I missed Maple Ridge sometimes, missed the community we'd built together after Patricia's downfall. I stayed in the Facebook group and kept up with the neighborhood news. They still invited me to the annual block party, and I made the drive down whenever I could. At one of those block parties, about 2 years after I'd moved, Marcus pulled me aside with a grin on his face. "You'll never guess who applied to rent a house on Evergreen Street." "Who?" I asked. "Patricia's daughter, Emily. She wants to move back to the area and saw a listing in Maple Ridge." "You're kidding." "Nope. The landlord called me to ask about the neighborhood and mentioned her name. I recognized it immediately." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That her mother had been our HOA president, had embezzled a lot of money, and that it had been a whole thing. I also said that Emily had publicly denounced her mother's actions and shouldn't be judged for her parents' crimes." "Did he rent to her?" I asked. "He did. She moved in last month. Nice woman, keeps to herself mostly. I think she's embarrassed about the whole situation, but people have been kind to her." That was the Maple Ridge I knew. A community that had learned to judge people on their own merits, not on their associations or their family history. A neighborhood that had been through fire and come out stronger. The sun was setting as the block party wound down. Kids were getting tired and cranky. Adults were starting to clean up the tables and fold up the chairs. I helped Marcus load some equipment back into the community center. And as we worked, I looked around at the happy, relaxed faces of the residents. This was what a community should be. People living their lives without fear, coming together to celebrate and support each other, governed by reasonable rules enforced with common sense and compassion. It had taken a crisis to get here, but we'd made it. As I drove back to Fort Collins that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Karen Chen. It was a photo of the old violation notice she'd found while cleaning out her garage, the one Patricia had given her about her Ring doorbell being not in keeping with community aesthetics. Karen had written "lol" across the image. I laughed and sent back a thumbs up. Those days were gone, relegated to stories we told and lessons we'd learned. Patricia Whitmore's reign of terror was over, ended by her own arrogance and greed, and finished by a community that finally said enough. And it had all started because she made the mistake of blocking my driveway on a snowy January morning, thinking she was above the law and consequences. She'd been wrong, and that mistake had cost her everything while giving our neighborhood a chance to become what it should have been all along. That's the story of how an HOA Karen blocked my driveway with snow and got towed and fined before she finished breakfast. But it's also the story of how a community found its voice, took back its power, and learned that standing together against injustice, no matter how petty or mundane it might seem, is always worth it. Because sometimes the smallest act of resistance, like calling a tow truck on an illegally parked car, can change everything.